Today we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. As always, viewer discretion is advised. July 15th, 1995. The morning sun beat down on the Florida landscape as two experienced cave divers prepared for what should have been a routine technical dive into Thunderhole Cave. Robert McGuire and Del Motes had planned this dive meticulously over the previous weeks, studying maps of the underwater cave system and calculating their gas requirements with precision. The dive plan called for mixed gas diving, a sophisticated technique that uses different nitrogen and oxygen mixtures at various depths to extend bottom time and reduce decompression requirements. Two separate breathing mixtures had been prepared with laboratory precision: a standard nitrox blend for the deeper portions of the dive and a 50-50 mix, 50% oxygen and 50% nitrogen, intended exclusively for shallower depths during the decompression phase. The tanks were labeled with their gas contents clearly marked on white tape wrapped around each cylinder. McGuire had taken several Sudafed tablets before arriving at the dive site that morning. His sinuses had been bothering him for days, and the decongestant was meant to help him equalize pressure during descent, a common practice among divers dealing with congestion. The water at Thunderhole's entrance was cool and inviting. The cave system was well known among Florida's technical diving community, a challenging environment that demanded respect, proper procedures, and unwavering attention to detail. McGuire and Motes entered the water together shortly after 10 in the morning. The descent began smoothly through crystal clear water. The divers dropped through the water column at a controlled rate. Visibility was excellent that day, perhaps 100 feet or more, and the familiar formations guided them deeper into the system. At 70 feet, approximately 21 meters below the surface, they reached their first planned waypoint. The cave passage opened into a larger room here, a natural gathering point that many divers used as a staging area. This was where McGuire should have switched to his deeper mix and secured the 50-50 tank at this depth for later use during decompression. The 50-50 mixture with its high oxygen content was perfect for shallow stops between 20 and 70 feet, where it would accelerate nitrogen elimination from body tissues without creating oxygen toxicity. Standard procedure called for leaving this tank here, marked with a light or line, ready for pickup on the return journey. But somehow, in the routine of the dive and the distraction of the stunning cave environment, the switch never happened correctly. Perhaps McGuire became disoriented in the moment, or maybe the Sudafed was affecting his mental clarity more than he realized. Whatever the reason, he continued his descent with the wrong tank, carrying the 50-50 mix deeper into the cave system, while the appropriate deeper mixture, the one designed for high-pressure depths, remained clipped to his harness, unused or perhaps left behind at 70 feet, waiting uselessly for a diver who had already passed it by. Motes, swimming nearby in the crystal-clear water, had no reason to question his partner's gas management. Each diver was responsible for their own gas selection and switching procedures. The buddy system in technical diving assumes that each diver maintains their own protocols while providing backup for emergencies. There was no way for Motes to know that McGuire was breathing the wrong mixture as they descended together into the depths. They continued downward through increasingly narrow passages. The cave walls closed in around them as they followed the natural contours of the limestone. The pressure increased steadily with every meter of descent, squeezing their wetsuits tighter against their bodies and compressing the air in their tanks. At 140 feet, nearly 43 meters below the surface, they reached their planned maximum depth. The cave passage here was spectacular, a tunnel carved by ancient underground rivers that had long since vanished. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and the pressure at this depth was approximately 5.3 atmospheres, more than 5 times the pressure at sea level. Every gas breathed at this depth was compressed to that same pressure, including the oxygen molecules flowing into McGuire's lungs with each breath. His regulator delivered the 50-50 mix smoothly, the breathing resistance normal for this depth. Nothing felt wrong. There was no warning sign, no unusual sensation to alert him that every breath was bringing him closer to disaster. The 50-50 mix that was safe and even beneficial at 70 feet had become a deadly poison at 140 feet. The partial pressure of oxygen in his breathing gas had climbed far beyond safe limits. reaching levels that would cause oxygen toxicity, a condition where oxygen itself becomes toxic to the human central nervous system. That's because at 70 feet, the oxygen partial pressure in the 50-50 mix was manageable, approximately 1.6 atmospheres, right at the edge of accepted limits for technical diving. But at 140 feet, that same mixture created an oxygen partial pressure exceeding 2.6 atmospheres, well into the danger zone, where oxygen attacks the brain and nervous system like a poison. Oxygen toxicity is one of diving's most insidious dangers. The body's tissues, particularly the brain and nervous system, react violently to excessive oxygen pressure. Brain cells begin firing erratically, overwhelmed by the chemical imbalance. There are rarely any warning signs, no gradual onset of symptoms, no tingling or strange sensations, no time to recognize the danger and respond appropriately. McGuire and Moats spent approximately 15 minutes at maximum depth, exploring the passage and checking their dive computers regularly. Everything seemed normal. Both divers' lights played across the cave walls as they made mental notes of the features they would report to other divers later. Then they began the long ascent. This was when the dive plan called for careful decompression stops at various depths, allowing dissolved nitrogen to safely leave their tissues without forming dangerous bubbles in their bloodstream. The ascent proceeded according to plan initially, both divers rising slowly through the water column while controlling their buoyancy precisely. They rose through the water, making their required stops at predetermined depths. At each stop, they hovered motionless in the water for the calculated time, watching their dive computers count down the minutes. As they approached shallower depths, the oxygen partial pressure in McGuire's breathing gas was decreasing as the surrounding pressure decreased, but the damage may have already been done during the time at maximum depth. They were somewhere around 70 feet, perhaps beginning their decompression sequence, when everything went catastrophically wrong. Without any warning whatsoever, McGuire's body went completely rigid in the water. His regulator fell from his mouth as violent convulsions seized his entire frame. His arms jerked wildly in uncontrolled spasms, his legs kicked in random directions, and bubbles exploded from his mouth as water rushed in to fill his lungs. The oxygen toxicity had triggered a grand mal seizure, the most feared and most deadly consequence of breathing too much oxygen under pressure. Moats spun around at the sudden commotion, his light catching his friend's convulsing body. Horror and disbelief flooded through him as he watched McGuire thrashing uncontrollably in the water. He lunged forward immediately, reaching for his friend, trying desperately to stabilize him and get the regulator back into his mouth. But oxygen toxicity seizures are nearly impossible to manage underwater. The violent convulsions made it impossible for McGuire to hold anything, including his regulator. His jaw was clenched tight, then slack, then clenching again in rapid succession. Water flooded into McGuire's lungs with each involuntary gasp. His body was completely beyond his control, every muscle firing at random as his nervous system short-circuited under the toxic effects of too much oxygen. Moats struggled desperately, fighting against his friend's thrashing limbs, trying to force the regulator back in, trying somehow to reverse what was happening before his eyes. But some things cannot be stopped once they begin. The convulsions continued for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. McGuire's movements gradually weakened as his lungs filled with water and oxygen deprivation claimed his brain. Moats held his friend's body, still trying futilely to help, even as he knew it was already too late. The thrashing stopped. McGuire went limp in the water, his body now just dead weight in Moats' arms. There were no other divers present in the cave system that day. No one waited on the surface providing backup support or monitoring dive times. The two men had entered Thunderhole alone, following a practice that was common but always risky. Now, Moats faced the nightmare scenario every dive buddy fears. His partner was dead, and he was alone at depth with his own decompression obligations still unfulfilled. Moats had to make an impossible choice. He could not bring McGuire's body up immediately without risking his own life to decompression sickness. He secured his friend's body as best he could and completed his own decompression stops, each minute an agony of grief and shock. When he finally surfaced hours later, alone and devastated, the full weight of what had happened crashed down on him. His friend had died from a simple mistake. The wrong tank at the wrong depth. The 50-50 mix that should have been left at 70 feet had traveled to 140 feet, and the oxygen that gives life had become the poison that took it. The unmarked depth limits, the Sudafed tablets, the moment of confusion that led to the fatal gas selection, all of it combined into a tragedy that could never be undone. On January 5th, 2023, an experienced diver descended into the waters off the coast of Mexico for what should have been a routine day of harvesting shellfish. Tóbari Bay sits along the coast of Sonora, Mexico, in the Gulf of California, a body of water that's sometimes called the aquarium of the world because of its incredible marine biodiversity. The waters here are rich with sea life, from tiny plankton to massive whales, and everything in between. For local fishermen, these waters represent their livelihood, providing abundant catches of fish, shellfish, and other valuable marine resources. Manuel Nieblas Lopez was 53 years old in January 2023, and he was about as experienced as divers get in this part of Mexico. He had spent decades working these waters, diving to depths that would make most recreational divers uncomfortable, and harvesting various species of shellfish that were prized in local and international markets. Lopez wasn't some weekend hobbyist. He was a professional who understood the ocean, respected its dangers, and had survived countless dives without serious incident. On this particular morning, Lopez was part of a small crew that had set out to harvest calo de hacha, axe scallops, a valuable mollusk that's commonly collected throughout the Gulf of California. These scallops live on the seafloor at significant depths. Lopez was using a surface-supplied air system for this dive, which is significantly different from the scuba tanks that most people are familiar with. Instead of carrying compressed air on his back, Lopez was connected to the surface vessel by a long air hose that provided him with a continuous supply of breathing gas. This system allowed him to stay underwater for extended periods without worrying about running out of air. He could work for hours at a time, as long as the compressor on the boat kept running. The plan for the day was straightforward. Lopez would descend to the seafloor, somewhere between 11 and 18 meters, 36 to 59 feet, deep, and systematically harvest the axe scallops he found. His companions would remain on the support vessel above, managing his air supply, monitoring his progress through the air hose, and helping him load his harvest when he surfaced. As Lopez descended that morning, the water conditions were less than ideal. The visibility was relatively murky, not terrible, but not the crystal clear water that makes diving pleasant and safe. In murky water, it's harder to see potential dangers approaching, but he kept on descending towards his goal. Eventually, he was able to reach towards his destination. Lopez was working near the seafloor, moving among schools of fish as he searched for scallops to harvest. He was wearing a black wetsuit, standard equipment for divers working in these waters, and his movements through the water created vibrations and disturbances that any nearby predators could detect from considerable distances. What Lopez and his crew didn't know was that they weren't alone in Tóbari Bay that morning. Somewhere in the murky waters below, a massive great white shark was cruising through the area. This particular shark was enormous, estimated to be about 6 meters or 19 feet long, which is close to the maximum size that great white sharks typically reach. To put that in perspective, a 19-foot great white shark weighs somewhere around 2,000 to 2,500 pounds and has a mouth full of serrated teeth that can exert bite forces of up to 4,000 pounds per square inch. These are apex predators that have been perfecting their hunting techniques for millions of years, and they're capable of killing large prey with a single bite. What happened next occurred so quickly that Lopez probably never knew what hit him. The great white shark attacked with the explosive speed and power that makes these predators so terrifying. Great whites don't slowly circle their prey like in the movies. When they attack, they come from below at incredible velocity, using the element of surprise to ensure their prey has no chance to escape or defend itself. The shark struck Lopez with immense force, its jaws closing around his upper body in a single, catastrophic bite. The impact was so violent and the bite so powerful that it instantly decapitated Lopez and inflicted massive trauma to his shoulders and upper torso. This wasn't a test bite or an exploratory nibble. This was a full predatory strike from one of the ocean's most powerful predators. The crew members on the support vessel above had no warning that anything was wrong. One moment they were monitoring Lopez's dive through the air hose, and the next moment they felt unusual tension or movement in the line. They immediately began pulling Lopez back to the surface, probably thinking he had encountered some problem with his equipment or had gotten tangled in something on the seafloor. When they pulled Lopez's body to the surface, the scene that greeted them was something out of a nightmare. Their experienced colleague and friend had been essentially destroyed by the shark attack. The decapitation and massive injuries to his upper body made it immediately clear that he was dead, and that his death had been instantaneous. The entire attack had unfolded in a matter of seconds. From the moment the shark struck to the moment Lopez died was probably less than 5 seconds, possibly even less than 2 seconds. There was no prolonged struggle, no opportunity to fight back or escape. The great white shark had done what millions of years of evolution had designed it to do: identify prey, attack with overwhelming force, and kill instantly. The witnesses were unable to react or intervene because the entire event happened so quickly and so deep below the surface. By the time they pulled Lopez up, there was nothing that could be done to save him. The trauma was so severe that even if medical personnel had been standing by, Lopez's injuries were instantly fatal. Marine biologists and shark experts who investigated the incident later confirmed that Lopez's injuries were consistent with a single predatory bite from a large great white shark. This is actually relatively rare. Most shark attacks on humans are cases of mistaken identity where the shark takes a single exploratory bite and then leaves. But in this case, the shark's bite was so powerful and so well placed that a single strike was sufficient to cause fatal injuries. The experts noted several factors that likely contributed to the attack. Here's where the tragic circumstances of this attack become clear. From below, Lopez would have presented a very specific silhouette against the lighter water above, a dark, roughly seal-shaped object, moving through the water in an area where the great white shark was hunting. Sea lions are one of the great white's preferred prey species in this region, and sharks have evolved to recognize and target that particular shape and movement pattern. Second, the murky water conditions that morning would have made it difficult for the shark to distinguish between a human diver and its natural prey until it was too close to abort the attack. Third, Lopez's surface-supplied air system meant he was tethered to the boat above, potentially creating vibrations or movements in the water that could attract predatory attention. Marine biologists noted that there had been reports of increased shark presence in the area, possibly linked to seasonal migrations and warmer water temperatures that were affecting marine animal distributions throughout the Gulf of California. The incident sparked renewed discussions about diver safety in the Gulf of California and the need for better understanding of shark behavior and distribution patterns in Mexican waters. Some experts suggested that divers working in areas with known shark populations should consider using shark deterrent devices, working in groups for mutual protection, or avoiding areas where sharks have been recently sighted. For Lopez's family, the loss was devastating. He was an experienced professional who had spent his entire adult life working in these waters without serious incident. He understood the risks of his profession and took appropriate precautions. But sometimes, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, when a large predator mistakes you for its natural prey, is a risk that no amount of experience or precaution can completely eliminate.